All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are unpacking a truly massive, defining moment in modern Asian history. We're looking at how two giant, newly independent nations, India and China, went from a widely celebrated agreement of peaceful coexistence to fighting a really tragic, bitter border war in 1962. It was this sudden, violent clash that completely reorganized the geopolitics of the Himalayas, and honestly, the echoes of it are still driving border tensions today. But before we really dive into the deep end, I need to quickly set up the historiographical context for the source material we're exploring. The analysis we are going over today is drawn from Indian-authored sources, and these sources are, broadly speaking, pretty critical of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's handling of the whole crisis. It's also important to note that we don't have direct Chinese primary accounts in this specific source base, so I want you to view this entire explainer as one well-supported academic interpretation of these events, rather than the absolute only way to read history.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to trace this trajectory in 5 parts. Inheriting imperial boundaries, Tibet and the Panchashil, the 1960 summit failure, India's forward policy, and finally, ambition versus military capacity.
Okay, Part 1, Inheriting Imperial Boundaries. This is the geopolitical inheritance that really set the stage for everything that followed. To understand the root of the 1962 war, you really have to grasp the absolute geopolitical confusion in the western sector, specifically the area we know as Ladakh and Aksai Chin. You see, both India and China inherited these vast, completely vague boundary lines way up in the Himalayas. When the British ruled India, they essentially played a giant geopolitical game of chess. They toyed with different boundary lines, depending entirely on how scared they were of the Russian Empire at any given moment. So you have British military intelligence pushing the really ambitious 1897 Ardag alignment, which basically claimed the entire Aksai Chin Plateau for India, right? And they did this just to keep the Russians as far away as humanly possible. But then the Indian government at the time looked at that and thought, well, that's way too ambitious to actually defend. So cut to 2 years later in 1899, they pitched the McDonald offer to China, which actually placed almost all of Aksai Chin inside China. But here's the crazy part. The Chinese government never even responded to the offer. So decades later, newly independent India inherits a map that is literally marked as undefined in the West. It was just a massive geopolitical trap waiting to be sprung.
Now, let's jump over to the eastern sector, what is today Arunachal Pradesh, because we need to define a really crucial specialist term here, the Macmillan line. This line was drawn back in 1914 during the Simla Conference between Britain and Tibet, and it essentially followed the highest Himalayan ridges. But here is the critical historical friction point. The Chinese government completely and utterly repudiated the Simla Convention. From Beijing's perspective, this treaty was just an illegal imperial relic. Why? Because they fundamentally denied that Tibet had any right whatsoever to conclude international treaties as an independent state. India, on the other hand, sought a legally binding treaty that permanently solidified their northern border. So you step back and look at it, and in both the West and the East, the foundational borders between the world's two most populous nations were built on diplomatic sand.
Which brings us to Part 2, Tibet and the Panchashil, and the devastating loss of a crucial buffer.
Let's make sure we're totally clear in our terminology. A buffer state is exactly what it sounds like. It's a neutral country situated right between two larger, potentially hostile powers, and its whole job is basically to prevent direct conflict. For decades under the British, Tibet functioned exactly like this. The vast, incredibly rugged Tibetan plateau ensured that India's northern border was this quiet, largely unmilitarized zone. You didn't really have to worry about it. But then, in 1950, the newly unified Communist People's Republic of China invaded Tibet. The psychological shock of this to New Delhi, it's genuinely hard to overstate. That crucial buffer state was just erased overnight. Centuries of historic security completely vanished, and suddenly, for the literal first time in history, a highly mobilized Chinese military presence was staring directly at India across those totally undefined northern borders we just talked about.
So, how does India respond to this immense strategic earthquake? With a diplomatic compromise. In 1954, India formally signed an agreement with China regarding Tibet. India actually gave up its inherited imperial rights in the region and officially acknowledged Tibet as a region of China. In exchange, this treaty enshrined what became known as the Panchashil, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Publicly, this was celebrated as a massive triumph. It was hailed as the ultimate symbol of Asian solidarity and anti-colonial brotherhood. But you're probably wondering, why on earth would Prime Minister Nehru sign this if he suspected China might have territorial ambitions? Well, the sources suggest it was really a matter of buying time.
Privately, Nehru was actually far from naive about this. He was writing urgent notes to his cabinet, fully expecting gradual, stealthy Chinese infiltration across the border. He stated repeatedly that India desperately needed to rapidly fortify its civilian administration in these remote areas.
Moving on to Part 3, the 1960 summit failure. This is where the diplomacy completely breaks down. Let's track this timeline, because it shows just how incredibly fast those principles of peaceful coexistence completely disintegrated. The absolute, undeniable turning point was March 1959. A massive uprising erupted in Tibet against Chinese rule, which culminated in the Dalai Lama's harrowing flight across the freezing mountains and into India, where New Delhi officially granted him asylum. Now, while the Indian public and the government viewed this as a deeply necessary, completely humanitarian act, Chairman Mao Zedong looked at it through a very strict ideological lens. As the sources point out, Beijing heavily suspected Nehru of actively colluding with Western imperialists to steal Tibet and turn it back into a buffer state. This profound ideological divide basically shattered whatever tiny bit of trust remained. By August 1959, the simmering tension turned into actual blood on the border during an armed clash at Longju. Desperate to stop the slide into a full-scale war, Nehru and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai met in New Delhi in April 1960. It was supposed to be a last-ditch effort to save the peace. Instead, the summit was a spectacular, monumental failure.
To understand why it failed, you really have to look at this mapping of the Western sector. Check out that dotted line. That represents what China officially claimed as its boundary just a few years earlier in 1956. But then, during the 1960 talks, the Chinese delegation brings out a newly drawn map with a solid line pushing way further west. This new map suddenly incorporated an additional 2,500 square miles of territory that India claimed was its own. And when Beijing sat there and insisted there was absolutely no discrepancy between the two maps, well, the sheer shock for the Indian diplomats was palpable. For New Delhi, this wasn't just a mistake, it was indisputable proof of bad faith. They concluded right then and there that the Chinese were secretly advancing under the guise of diplomacy, and that if they compromised even an inch, it would just be used as a stepping stone for endless territorial demands. Trust was entirely, 100% gone.
And that leads us right into Part 4, India's forward policy, a strategy of, frankly, flawed deterrence. Initiated in late 1961, the forward policy was this incredibly high-stakes strategy that was born out of a totally frozen diplomatic channel and mounting intense domestic pressure. The strategy dictated the establishment of a whole network of small forward military posts right up to what India considered its international border. The goal here was essentially prophylactic, right? India wanted to prevent a fait accompli. That's a scenario where Chinese forces could just quietly occupy this disputed, uninhabited territory and then declare the border permanently settled simply because they were physically standing on it. India wanted to get there first.
So, the logic behind the forward policy basically unfolded in 3 incredibly risky steps. First, military patrols were supposed to go out and find the physical gaps in border control. Second, they would establish these small posts right in those gaps, and sometimes they were literally zigzagging behind existing Chinese outposts. They were creating this perilous, high-altitude game of geopolitical chess. Third, and this is the most crucial part, they were supposed to deter any further advances by the People's Liberation Army without actually initiating combat. But as we unpack this, the fatal flaw just screams at you. This entire massive strategy was built on one huge civilian assumption. Nehru firmly believed that China, which, by the way, was reeling from its own catastrophic domestic crises after the Great Leap Forward, he believed they were far too weak internally to actually risk a major international war over a bunch of remote Himalayan peaks. Nehru thought he was executing this really clever deterrence. Beijing, however, looked at these advancing Indian posts and viewed them as brazen, unprovoked aggression.
Let's move to Part 5, Ambition versus Military Capacity. This is the systemic failure that brought it all down.
Back in New Delhi, the political imperatives had reached an absolute fever pitch. Parliament was in an uproar. The press was demanding a very strict no-surrender stance. Any sort of diplomatic barter, like trading claims in Ladakh for recognition of the eastern border, would have almost certainly cost Prime Minister Nehru his political survival. So, bowing to this incredibly fierce domestic pressure, the civilian government gives the order to push forward.
But thousands of feet up in the freezing cold Himalayas, the Indian military was facing a totally incompatible reality. The logistical nightmare was just profound. India simply did not have the roads, the transport aircraft, or the supply lines to actually sustain these remote, high-altitude posts. I mean, soldiers were often being sent up into the freezing mountains in summer uniforms. The military leadership explicitly, clearly warned the civilian government that they literally could not tactically support or reinforce these new forward positions if the Chinese actually decided to attack.
To really understand the sheer dread brewing within the Indian military establishment at this time, you have to look at General K.S. Thimia. He served as the highly respected Chief of Army Staff until 1961. Writing just months before the war finally erupted, he issued this desperate plea saying, "I cannot even as a soldier envisage India taking on China in an open conflict on its own. It must be left to the politicians and diplomats to ensure our security." The top Indian commanders knew exactly what they were facing. They knew the civilian mandate to push forward was a massive bluff, a bluff they simply did not have the manpower, the supply lines, or the firepower to actually back up. So let's step back for a second and summarize all these converging factors, because together they made the 1962 disaster practically inevitable. You have the Indian civilian government pushing this aggressive forward policy, establishing highly vulnerable isolated posts with practically zero adequate rear military support. Because of this, Indian forces found themselves severely outnumbered and drastically outgunned by the People's Liberation Army. And this fatal positioning was entirely enabled by Nehru's mistaken intelligence assessment that China simply wouldn't risk a full-scale war. Concurrently, as our sources outline here, Mao Zedong's ideological worldview convinced him that India wasn't acting independently at all, but rather as this expansionist pawn of Western imperialists trying to steal Tibet. Add in the complete breakdown of diplomatic trust following the shifting map lines of the 1960 summit, and the stage was perfectly set for a catastrophic, systemic failure. Which brings us right to the end of our explainer today, and it leaves us with a really critical, provocative question that I want you to think about. When grand political strategy, driven by fierce domestic pressure and deep ideological assumptions, entirely ignores the stark logistical realities of the military on the ground, is disaster inevitable? Think about the profound tragedy of this historical moment. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence just evaporated into the freezing Himalayan air, totally undone by the lingering shadows of the British Empire, the sudden loss of a historic buffer state, and this fatal, tragic failure to truly understand an adversary's worldview. Thank you so much for joining me for this analysis. Keep questioning and keep exploring.